Citizen 12 is brought to you by Complexify, a social purpose corporation founded to support you living in alignment with your conscience and discerning what that is. Find out more at complexify.org. complexiphy.org.
Hello, citizens. My name is Paige Hulsey, and this is episode 12 of the Citizen 12 podcast. Citizen 12 is not a program or health treatment, but an inclusive place, common ground to share and learn. If you have not yet listened to episode 0, we invite you to do that. You'll get a good sense of what the show is about and hear our steps, which were inspired by Alcoholics Anonymous, and those can also be found through any of our sites. A little more of a preface. This show, this content may stir stuff up for you. In some ways, that's part of the point, but also we acknowledge that this can be hard, uncomfortable, even disruptive. Please engage with us responsibly and don't be on your own with stuff. Be in touch if that's the right thing. We care about you. It's why we're making the show. Our podcast is created in Seattle, Washington. We acknowledge this as Duwamish land and strive to honor the past, present, and future Indigenous lives here. Citizen 12 supports Duwamish tribal services by paying real rent. Find out more at realrentduwamish.org. Today's show is our follow-up to our episode all about meditation. If you've been listening lately, you know we've been experimenting with our format, and today is no exception. I am flying solo without my co-host, Emily. This is not a permanent change, but like I said, we're experimenting with how to bring you this content in a way that works for us and works for you. Okay, on today's show, I am going to discuss 3 common predictable traps related to meditation. First, I'm going to talk about, more about rigidity, and then some about feeling bad. And then last, I will talk about what I think of as some sort of complex consequences, or almost even like unanticipated or unintended consequences of meditation. Trap number 1, rigidity. We've talked quite a bit about rigidity, and we will continue to talk about rigidity because, in my experience, it is a common barrier that arises when attempting to practice spiritual principles and make spiritual growth. And I think there are some simple reasons for that. For one, it's not hard to get discipline collapsed with rigidity. And because discipline is a component of a lot of this practice, it's like rigidity just comes along for the ride. So, as with most topics we talk about here, I hope to just shed more light on this issue rather than close the can of worms or have the final word about rigidity. This is an opportunity to keep exposing and adding to our understanding. This give and take between discipline and rigidity, I had talked about how my current practice of meditation does include a habit of a routine of monitoring what kind of meditation might be needed or useful or appropriate at a given time. in my day or in my life even. I realized that can sound quite a bit like just doing a meditation that I want or doing what I feel like doing. And it seemed like could be useful to add a little more to that, to distinguish rigidly doing the same thing every day, no matter what, and developing discipline, but doing what's appropriate and making space for what is needed to happen. And then also not just slipping into doing whatever I feel like. The only way I really know how to do that is to share how it is for me now. I think a component is that I just have this standing commitment to be meditating. And for me, as we said in our last show, that includes like a traditional view of meditation as like a sitting practice. But it also includes the fruit of that, or what I see as the fruit of that, which for me includes living meditatively. So I maintain this ongoing valuing of meditation as like a principle. And then a way that I see that stays alive is that I bring my attention to it daily. So for me, I do have a habit of making time in my morning, at least in the morning, to step back from the other duties of the day and do some sort of assessment of what meditation would be appropriate. When I do this assessment, I have the bank of experience of all of my years of meditation to fall back on, to consider about what might be useful. And I suspect that serves me to have had different experiences with different ways of meditating. I know a clue too is that I sometimes run down a sort of checklist of how I'm practicing the principles of the steps, or like how alive the principles are in my life. And then I might do a meditation that seems appropriate to whatever I notice is missing when I do that rundown. And probably even already in how I'm talking about this, you can tell this isn't about just doing a meditation that I feel like doing. I talk quite a bit in my life. I find myself talking about how living in alignment with my wants has just not worked very well for me. I joke that I just, if I just did what I wanted, I would eat Cheetos and masturbate and play video games forever. And really, frankly, so the toned down version of that statement is I just want to sit around and eat Cheetos and watch TV. Sometimes it's been I just want to, smoke crack and play video games. Just going with what I want has proven to not be an adequate way of determining how to proceed. So I really am talking about establishing a framework rather than a mandate. And this dance between discipline and rigidity and appropriateness is all over my life and practice, not just with meditation. I notice it even with my exercise. And I don't know if it's my personality or what exactly. I've said in the show before, I have a rowing machine and I've been rowing, and it helps me to pre-plan what my rowing workout is going to be in advance. So when it comes down to actually working out, I don't have to think about what I'm going to do. I just do what I had planned to do. But I have noticed that if I have a very definitive, fixed aim for the day, it's just not a great fit for me. I notice that it's like it just doesn't, there's not enough space to do what's appropriate. So I use an established rowing workout regime. And the one I have found that I really like gives a range for the day. So yesterday when I rowed, if I recall correctly, the recommendation was to row a steady state row between 2,000 and 3,000 meters. Not a steady state, a distance row of between 2 and 3K. And for me, that flexibility makes a difference in my ability or interest in fulfilling on the agreement. And it really just seems to be that way with other areas in my life too, not just with rowing, but with meditation. So when I have a suspicion about why that is with meditation, which is that it seems like it's Paige and not the like big, powerful, divinely connected part of Paige, but like a different component that gets ideas about how exactly I'm supposed to meditate, whether that's how much time I'm supposed to spend or what I'm supposed to be doing during that time. That rigidity seems to arise from like ego or fear or, I don't know, stuff that I don't really trust with my spiritual well-being. I know another piece of this is that for a long time, I think I was attempting to verify my willingness to meditate by establishing rigid parameters. And at some point, I actually had enough evidence about myself to see that my meditation practice, and it's again, not just my meditation practice, but in different areas of my life, I don't have to prove my willingness anymore. There's just a body of evidence that indicates that I have an adequate quantity of willingness at my disposal. And now I've been able to develop something else with my practice. And these days I think of it a lot like as agility. So this ability to discern and do what's appropriate as needed. I mean, that's agility, right? And to me, agility is more in alignment with my spiritual calling than anything like rigidity or proving willingness. Trap number 2, feeling bad about how we meditate. Not infrequently, I hear people say something like, oh, yeah, I don't really meditate very well, or I don't really know how to do that, or I'm terrible about meditating, or I'm trying to think if I hear like more extreme either way. Not really, but generally I can't recall the last time I heard someone talking about their experiences with meditation in a way that made it sound like they were particularly satisfied or proud or even at peace with their practice. And I have really come to appreciate when I can be at peace about how I'm operating in different departments of my life. So I really strive with these practices to do what is needed so that my practice meets my satisfaction. And it took time to even get interested in that, or to even kind of have the security to trust that I could do that. And I don't do it on my own. I have a good number of people who I talk about these matters with and kind of let in on how I'm doing and what I'm doing. And I am not opposed to getting feedback about what it looks like from the people I trust and who know me. And unsurprisingly, if you've come to know me through this show, it's my own conscience that I see really has got to be satisfied here. And for me, that does mean taking into account and striving for me being satisfied with my practice. It looks to me as though connected with this matter of feeling bad about our practice is another common thing I observe, which is many of us not really appreciating or valuing or trusting the value of our own actual life experience. I'm sure you have thought or heard someone say something like, oh, I don't really have anything to say about that. I mean, yeah, I guess I know what you mean, but you should talk to somebody who has like a success story. This idea that the important information about meditation is going to come from people who have a perfect meditation practice. It kills off all of the juicy, delicious treasure in the nitty-gritty of what it's actually like to live through the experience of growth. And I'm not saying, that indiscriminate vulnerability is right. That would be the extreme here. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I am committed to making space for appreciation of whatever it is that we are actually dealing with. I'm on the fly trying to think if I have a current example. Well, I guess I could use watching TV as an example. I watch TV, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon. Okay, probably don't want to be boosting those channels, but I don't have cable, but we have access to the internet and services, and I watch TV shows and movies and all kinds of things. And it's not like how I watch TV feels perfectly packaged or like, I guess, proud. I guess that's a good thing for me to notice. It's not like I think how I watch TV is so perfect and thoughtful that I would recommend it to everyone. I trust, though, that in sharing what is actually going on with me with watching TV is probably valuable. My experience in life is that interacting with people how they actually are is where the goods are. I've kind of had enough. I think we've all kind of had enough of dealing with the masks, the fake image that so many of us, myself included, have found ourselves presenting to the world. I don't think the world needs any more of Paige's idea about how Paige should be. I think the world needs who I really actually am. And I'm not just saying this about me, but this is how it is for me in my community. I want to be with who people really actually are. For me, that's where the delight and interest and connection is. So with meditation, my invitation is to, and this is a broader invitation, when we can just be telling the truth to ourselves about ourselves, oh man, that is excellent. I just find there's so much value in wading through the layers of ego and pretense and fear. And maybe not everybody has that. Maybe you don't have that with every area. I have had a lot of that. It takes effort for me to get to the truth with myself about myself. But doing that, getting accurately related or more accurately related to the reality of my practice and experience has been so valuable. And obviously we see this aim being valuable in other areas. This is kind of the spirit of an inventory, is getting to the truth about ourselves, with ourselves, getting more accurately related to reality. We find relief there. This has been true about my own reflection on my own experience of meditation. And I find it encouraging to just tell the truth to myself about how I feel about myself and my practice. Generally, I guess I can't say that. I wanted to say, usually when I get to the reality or closer to reality about something, it's not as bad as I'd been thinking. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it's worse. This seems like a good time to share a component of this. And really, this is like a blend of a rigid idea about how our meditation should be. I mean, without that, we couldn't really be dissatisfied about our meditation practice. or feel bad about it. Obviously, that means we have some idea about how it's supposed to be, which in my book sounds a lot like rigidity. So you may have heard meditation kind of metaphorically described, or maybe not metaphorically, but described as the listening component in a relationship with God. That prayer would be like the talking part and that meditation would be the listening part. And I don't dislike that view. I think that that can be useful. And as I've said before, in my meditation habit, I do strive to ensure that I'm listening and hearing and cleared out enough to be hearing whatever might be coming through. Now, a hang up there, though, would be that if we think we're not getting the message coming through, that then it would be easy to think that the meditation isn't working. And, you know, this touches back a little bit to the confusion that we talked about in our last episode, but I thought it would be a good time to say something about almost like quantity of guidance. And the example I used before was about registering for classes at school, that when I think I want guidance, spiritual guidance about which classes to register for, sometimes it seemed like I wasn't getting the information that I was looking for. And that it turned out, though, that I was getting other information about other areas of life. And in my experience, it has all come together, that the guidance in that other area of life has ultimately freed up space for me to see more clearly what classes would be good for me to take. But I think it's a good time for a reminder here about almost like the timeline of guidance that I have experience with. You know, I was going to say when I was young, but honestly, I can recall doing this in my 20s. Hoping, maybe even praying that I would like know what I was supposed to do with my life. And I think there were times when I thought that might be like God would tell me to get a PhD or be an MD, or I don't, you know, this is the kind of, I think I thought I was going to get like a picture of what my life was supposed to be like, and then I would know how to move toward that. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about that in the world. I don't think it's weird that I came up with that idea, but I want to be really clear. That is not at all how this life has gone for me. I'm going to use school as another example. When I graduated from my community college, I went and had kind of like a conclusion talk with one of my counselors. And he said, "Oh, Paige, you must be so proud. You know, you came to this school for a degree and you did what you had to do to get the degree and now you have it." And I said, and I really did say something like this, "Oh man, I think you must have forgotten how I did this, because that is not at all what happened here. I literally came to this school saying, I have no idea what is going to come next. I don't know if I'm going to come to school tomorrow, but my sense is that it was the right thing for me to do to come today, and I'm going to come today and participate." And I have a smile on my face, and it kind of sounds like I'm joking. I'm not joking. I really very drastically took the approach that going to school would be a one day at a time affair, and that we would see what happened. And it did result in a degree. And there were times when it was tempting to try to plan out further, longer term. And doing it one day at a time didn't preclude taking action on behalf of the future. Like, there came a day when it seemed like it was the right thing to do to fill out a FAFSA, a financial aid application. And there came a day when it seemed like it was the right thing to do to apply to transfer to another university, a 4-year university, which I did and transferred. But I didn't do those things because I had the guidance up front that that's where I was headed. So far, from what I can tell for myself, and I'm practicing it with the creation of this show, it has worked to take one tiny little baby step at a time. The other day I was talking about it in terms of micro guidance. Paige, like my personality, ego, whatever, frequently wants to know more of the story. My life experience says that's not really necessary. I'm going to share a meditation that I use to support this. And, I invite you to bear with me. This is not for everyone. And I've shared it with some people and it's been a good fit for them, a really good fit. And I've shared it with some people and they're like, yeah, I don't know, that seems goofy and weird. It's not really a good fit for me. And that's how a lot of these things go. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm going to share it in hopes that maybe it's a good fit for you, or maybe it'll support you in finding something that is a good fit for you if it isn't. So I get quiet in my way, and I personally do like to kind of make sure I'm related to my physical body and my physical environment. And that can be done in different ways. And this is a visual meditation. So for visual meditations, I do usually like to close my eyes. And I am doing it now as I describe it to you. And I really like hallways. I find hallways really peaceful. They're usually clear of clutter, and I find them architecturally interesting usually. And frankly, I often imagine kind of like an office building hallway, so it's really bare. And there might be like some slight kind of ramps up and down in the hallway, and there's a banister. I envision a banister. And I do envision the banister for whatever reason on my right side. And I guess I'm noticing sometimes the banister might be different materials. Sometimes I think today it's like brass, and it's dark in the hallway. It's dark enough that I can't really see where we're going, but it's not pitch black, but it's dim. For me, the meditation is about focusing my attention on just resting my hand on the banister and scooting my right foot, out forward just a little bit. Now, that might seem like a very short visualization, but this interruption to me thinking I need to know the whole story of what PhD program I'm going to do, at what school, and who I'm going to marry, and where we're going to live. And, it's not hard to get tempted to think I need to know the whole story, the whole script of the play. So doing this meditation, I can get myself back to being oriented to that it's safe to just trust the next little step that is indicated. And really, I can't think of a time in my life where from wherever I was at any moment of any day, that there wasn't at least one little tiny baby step indicated to move forward. And sometimes it really is just like, do the dishes, or just make that one phone call, or just brush my teeth, or I don't know. A lot of life hasn't seemed to require that degree of effort to observe the next step. A lot of life seems to come more easily, which is great. But in moments of difficulty, I find this approach, and obviously I didn't make this up. This is consistent with very widespread practice of one day at a time or one moment at a time. But for me, getting related to that, I do receive what seems to be an adequate share of this micro guidance helps me feel satisfied that my meditation practice, whatever it is effective, is adequately effective. I take great comfort in knowing that I can just put one foot in front of the other, and that maybe small step is all I really can do. That's all I can ever do at any one time, is just the next thing that's indicated. And I won't conceal it from you. Literally, when I sat down to record this show this morning, it was that was what was indicated. Trap number 3, complex consequences. There are kind of 2 categories here of these complicated consequences of meditation. And we touched on one of them a little bit in the last episode. We talked about how if we are actively avoiding stuff in our life, this is probably going to pose a problem in meditation. If there are areas of life that we have been persistently uninterested or unwilling to address, my experience is that really has been a barrier to peaceful, useful, interesting, satisfying meditation. The point of meditation for me is, listening. And when I'm listening openly, I might hear anything. I mean, I don't know. That's kind of the point, right? Is that I'm making space to hear whatever there is to hear. So if I have already predetermined that I won't hear some specific things, then clearly that's going to interfere with what I can hear. And unfortunately, my experience is that it doesn't just preclude hearing those things I said I didn't want to hear. It actually kind of warps and distorts the other stuff I can hear. I talked in the last show about being open to practicing an established religion. I didn't mention that there were years where that was not at all on the table. I would say from between 17 years old and maybe, I don't know, somewhere in my mid-20s, I was adamant, and I can say now, I don't think I knew how adamant I was that I would not be a part of a religious organization. And it wasn't until sometime in my mid-20s that I reconciled with that I could trust that if at some point it was indicated that that was the right thing, that would be okay, that I didn't have to block out guidance about religion to protect me, that I could actually trust what would come up. And as I said before, it hasn't come up for me to join a religious institution. But making that space to hear that broadened my listening, broadened what I was able to hear. That's what I'm committed to. This might be a good chance to share that sometimes the things that come up in meditation are kind of like specific actions to take. And I definitely keep something to capture notes with at hand, or find that I have to jump up in the middle of my meditation to take note. I think there was a time when I wasn't organized enough to make sure or to have a practice of writing things down when they came up. Or maybe it was that I didn't really appreciate how valuable some of that information is. Someone introduced me to something called two-way prayer, and I can link to it in the show notes. The sentiment behind it I really connected with. Some of the packaging of it didn't really appeal to me. The flavor of it felt Christian in a way that felt constraining. But the practice described in this two-way prayer is pretty seriously parallel with what I find myself doing anyway. And part of what I really like about that is that they include this writing down what comes up in the meditation portion of the two-way prayer. So I think if I recall correctly, there is this prayer or talking part and then a meditation or listening portion. And I'm trying to recall what a recent note I may have made to myself in meditation. Sometimes it's to talk to someone about something that came up to see if further action is indicated. Sometimes it's more like just remembering something outstanding that needs doing. I haven't found it to be problematic to just take note of these things. And sometimes when I review the note later, I can see, oh yes, still that's an appropriate thing to move forward on. And sometimes whatever it was has kind of already happened or taken place, or there's no further action needed. So again, this kind of lightly attached, lots of space to interact with what comes up in an empowering way. Not like if I make a note in meditation, then that means that's the word of God and I have to do whatever it said. Again, obviously, I'm much more leery about that kind of certainty and rigidity and adamance than I am this more exploratory, curious, space-making approach. A second aspect to this less intended consequence or more complicated consequence of meditation is sort of something like growing away from our old relationships or environments. And how destabilizing that can be. It's no secret that making changes in our lives, like implementing these principles and the practices that are required to implement these principles, they change us. I've talked about becoming tenderer, getting tenderized in this show. This is like a real legitimate way that how I operate in the world has changed. And I'm into it. I like it. It seems good. And it wasn't easy or pleasant or welcomed by everyone in my life. There were people and relationships who related to me the way that I had been before, which, as I've described, was way tougher, way rougher, way more rough and tumble, And there were people in my life, I had people who liked it that way, who liked me that way, who were also that way. And growing and changing starts to shift what those relationships are like. Now, if you are listening as someone who practices these steps, and we're talking about meditation, you may have already had some experience with the 9th step, which in my experience is really kind of the umbrella for where this usually gets addressed. But it's not different in the other steps. As we grow and change, there are effects in our relationships and in our environments. And so we bring this up here because we just want to say you're not on your own with this. It doesn't have to be ignored that there are difficult aspects of growing and changing, even with coming to meditate. That's a valid, real component of this. I don't find that I need to shy away from that. It has worked for me to be responsible for it, to notice, observe, and talk about it when that's appropriate. There have been relationships that had to kind of fall by the wayside and it's not just me, other people change too. But there were relationships that weren't going to continue through our changes. And then have been relationships where there was space mutually to adjust and kind of appreciate newly who we're growing into being. But this aspect of continuing to be known for who we're growing into being, it's not a small thing. All of my experience has been that if I just change and don't really address the change, there's like remnants, is that the right word? Left over from how I used to be. And that those remnants, that detritus or whatever, can get sorted out, mostly in my experience through communication, like we talk about in the 9th step. But it's ongoing. It doesn't, for me, it hasn't ended. This is continual. As I practice these principles, I continue to have change and growth in my life. And that kind of like necessitates or calls for continued addressing of those changes. We'll even take loose ends for an example. I'm going to say that it's no small thing that my husband has to kind of deal with me as someone who has a low tolerance for loose ends. And that has ramped up since we've been together. Now, most people I think would see that as a good thing, but I think you can probably also hear that might pose, threat might not quite be the right word, but that's kind of threatening or might be difficult to navigate. When people change, it can be confronting. It makes us feel like we have to change or that we're going to lose out if we don't, or, well, how do we re-navigate what it is now? It's not just totally straightforward. And I am reassured that by bringing attention to it, just shining the light on it, that it can dispel some of the unease about it. I don't think this is a component that I need to be. I take it back. I am interested in not honoring my fear of change and sacrificing growth. I am interested in finding a way to proceed in relationships as we grow and change, even when that means that relationships change. It might be that these are times when we need to sort of ensure that we are bolstering the other supportive frameworks in our life. Maintaining adequate security is great. I think of it as when you tie a load down in the back of a truck. I know I'm full of these things, but I find them useful. So when you tie a load down in the back of a truck, you don't just attach the tarp or whatever at one point. Obviously, you'd lose your load. We attach it at a number of points, however many it takes. And this is the same for me in terms of security and practice in my life. So let's even just say I'm having a weird time with meditation. I'm finding I don't want to do it. I'm not doing it. It feels like it's not working, whatever. For me, I know that might be a time to give extra attention to the other practices in my life that bring similar fruit or that I know I can depend on. So for me, that might include spending more time in service or in community or in some kind of praise activity, which is not usually how I see meditation. Kind of making sure that the load is tied down wherever it can be, not depending too heavily on any one piece. Because, I mean, if you're like me, there's variation and fluctuation with these aspects of our practices. Okay, we will undoubtedly come back to these topics again, but that is all for now. Thank you for joining me. This show isn't a thing without you. Please find us online, chime in, write to us. We are listening for how best to serve. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, all at C12Pod, C12Pod. I haven't really been mentioning this in episodes, but we are also on YouTube, where you can find us by searching for C12Pod. It looks to us as though our community could really use this content, and we are excited to create and share it. This is a 100% listener-supported show, so if you already like what you're hearing, or even if you don't, but you think what we're up to is good, please contribute through Patreon at patreon.com/C12Pod. And support us by subscribing, rating the show, and writing us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you to each of you who contribute to this work.